Three gold stars gleam against the deep blue Soviet uniform. The man wearing them has done something unprecedented in military history. He has revolutionized aerial combat, while simultaneously becoming the most decorated pilot of his nation. But what happens when innovation meets tradition? When a young mechanic's son challenges the entire doctrine of the world's largest air force? Alexander Pokryshkin didn't just shoot down enemy aircraft. He rewrote the rules of engagement in the skies above Eastern Europe. His methods were so radical that his own commanders nearly court-martialed him for disobedience. Yet those same methods would save thousands of Soviet lives and turn the tide of aerial warfare on the Eastern Front. The question isn't simply how many planes he destroyed, though the number is staggering. The deeper mystery lies in understanding how one man's willingness to think differently transformed not just his own fate, but the destiny of an entire air force during humanity's most devastating conflict. Don't forget to like, leave a comment, and subscribe. You are not here by accident. Novosibirsk, then called Novonikolayevsk, was hardly the place where military legends were expected to emerge. This Siberian railway junction, cold and industrial, seemed designed to produce factory workers and engineers, not aerial revolutionaries. Yet on March 6, 1913, Maria and Ivan Pokryshkin welcomed a son who would defy every expectation placed on children from working-class families. Ivan Pokryshkin worked as a stoker, feeding coal into the hungry furnaces that powered the machinery of early 20th century Russia. The family lived modestly, their wooden house typical of the growing industrial town. Young Alexander grew up surrounded by the constant sounds of steam engines, hammering metal, and the mechanical rhythm of progress. But something distinguished this particular boy from his peers. While other children played with wooden toys, Alexander found himself drawn to anything mechanical. He would disassemble alarm clocks, study the moving parts of bicycles, and spend hours watching the locomotives that thundered through his hometown. His mother often discovered him in their small yard, covered in grease and surrounded by the scattered components of some device he had taken apart to understand its inner workings. The local school provided basic education, but Alexander's real classroom was the world around him. He learned to read not just books, but blueprints. He developed an intuitive understanding of how machines moved, how they could be improved, and most importantly, how they could be pushed beyond their designed limitations. When other teenagers in Novonikolayevsk dreamed of following their fathers into factories or farms, Alexander's eyes turned skyward. The few aircraft that occasionally passed over his hometown seemed to him like mechanical poetry, complex machines that had conquered the ultimate frontier. Aviation was still exotic in Siberia during the 1920s, but something about those distant shapes in the sky called to him with irresistible force. His family initially viewed this obsession with skepticism. Practical people don't chase dreams about flying, they reasoned. Practical people learn useful trades, find stable employment, and build predictable lives. But Alexander's determination proved stronger than their doubts, and eventually, they began to see that their son possessed something beyond ordinary ambition. After completing his basic education, Alexander enrolled in a technical institute studying construction. This choice might seem removed from his aerial dreams, but it reflected his methodical approach to achieving goals. He understood that aviation required not just courage, but deep technical knowledge. Buildings and aircraft, he reasoned, both demanded understanding of stress, materials, and structural integrity. His early jobs reinforced this technical foundation. He worked as a construction laborer, then as a mechanic in various workshops around Novosibirsk. Each position taught him something different, about how machines functioned under pressure, how materials behaved at their limits, and how human decisions could determine whether complex systems succeeded or failed catastrophically. During these years, Alexander spent every spare moment studying aviation. He read technical manuals, engineering journals, and accounts of aerial combat from the Great War. But reading wasn't enough. He needed to understand flight from the inside. When a local flying club formed in Novosibirsk, he joined immediately, despite the significant cost and the disapproval of some family members who considered flying a dangerous frivolity. His first experience in an aircraft cockpit confirmed everything he had suspected. The mechanical complexity that had fascinated him since childhood took on new dimension when combined with three-dimensional movement through space. But more than the technical challenge, flight offered something else, a realm where quick thinking, precise judgment, and split-second decisions could mean the difference between triumph and disaster. The instructors at the flying club noticed something unusual about their new student. While other novice pilots focused on basic control techniques, Alexander asked probing questions about aerodynamics, engine performance, and tactical possibilities. He wanted to understand not just how to fly, but how to fly better than anyone else. In 1933, Alexander applied to the Perm Military Aviation School. The selection process was rigorous. Hundreds of young men competed for a few dozen positions. Physical fitness, psychological stability, and basic technical knowledge were all assessed. But what set Alexander apart was his demonstrated ability to think systematically about complex problems under pressure. The Perm Military Aviation School transformed enthusiastic young men into professional military pilots, but the process was neither gentle nor guaranteed. Many candidates washed out during the first months, unable to handle the combination of physical stress, mental pressure, and technical demands. Alexander not only survived but excelled, though not always in ways his instructors expected. Military aviation in the 1930s emphasized discipline, standardization, and adherence to established procedures. Pilots were expected to follow predetermined tactics, maintain formation discipline, and execute missions according to carefully planned protocols. Innovation was discouraged, even dangerous. The prevailing wisdom held that individual creativity in combat led to chaos and casualties. Alexander absorbed these lessons, but found himself constantly questioning their underlying assumptions. Why did fighter formations fly in rigid lines that limited maneuverability? Why did attack protocols prioritize formation integrity over tactical advantage? Why did training scenarios assume enemy pilots would behave predictably? His questions sometimes irritated instructors, but his flying performance was undeniable. He demonstrated exceptional spatial awareness, precise aircraft control, and an intuitive understanding of aerial geometry that allowed him to execute complex maneuvers with apparent ease. More importantly, he showed an ability to process multiple variables simultaneously, tracking his own aircraft's performance while monitoring weather conditions, fuel consumption, and potential threats. Upon graduation, Alexander received his assignment to a fighter regiment stationed in the Western Military District. This posting placed him near the Soviet Union's borders with Poland and Romania, regions where tensions were steadily increasing as European politics grew more unstable. The regiment flew Polikarpov aircraft, rugged, reliable fighters that embodied Soviet engineering philosophy. These planes prioritized simplicity and durability over sophistication, reflecting the practical constraints of mass production and field maintenance. Alexander quickly mastered not just flying these aircraft, but understanding their capabilities and limitations in ways that would prove crucial during the coming conflict. Life in a peacetime fighter regiment followed predictable rhythms. Morning briefings, training flights, technical study, physical conditioning, and evening discussions about tactics and equipment. For many pilots, this routine provided comfortable stability. For Alexander, it offered opportunities to develop and test ideas that were gradually taking shape in his mind. He began keeping detailed notes about every training exercise, recording not just his own performance, but observing patterns in how different pilots approached various scenarios. What techniques proved most effective for gaining altitude quickly? Which maneuvers allowed pilots to change direction while maintaining energy? How did aircraft performance vary under different weather conditions and altitudes? His squadron mates initially viewed this systematic approach with mild amusement. Most pilots relied on instinct and experience rather than analytical study. But Alexander's notes began revealing insights that improved not just his own performance, but the effectiveness of pilots who adopted his suggested modifications to standard procedures. The regimental commander, a veteran of earlier conflicts, recognized unusual potential in his methodical young pilot. Rather than discouraging Alexander's analytical tendencies, he provided access to additional technical resources and encouraged experimentation during training exercises. This support proved invaluable, allowing Alexander to develop and refine ideas without the constraints that might have stifled innovation in a more rigid environment. By 1940, Alexander had established himself as one of the regiment's most capable pilots. But capability alone doesn't create legends. The approaching storm of global conflict would provide the testing ground where theories become reality, where innovation meets the ultimate challenge of life and death in aerial combat. June 22, 1941 arrived like a thunderclap across the western borders of the Soviet Union. German aircraft appeared in the pre-dawn darkness, striking airfields with devastating precision. In a matter of hours, hundreds of Soviet planes were destroyed on the ground, and the carefully planned defensive preparations of years dissolved into chaos. Alexander's regiment found itself thrust immediately into desperate action. The neat theories and training exercises of peacetime evaporated in the face of a real enemy whose pilots had already gained extensive combat experience over Poland, France, and Britain. The Luftwaffe brought not just superior aircraft, but proven tactics and the confidence that comes from a string of victories. The initial encounters were devastating for Soviet aviation. Rigid formation flying, which had seemed so orderly and professional during training, proved suicidal against experienced German pilots who attacked with coordinated precision. Standard Soviet tactics, designed for a different kind of war against a different kind of enemy, resulted in catastrophic losses. During his first combat mission, Alexander witnessed the destruction of half his squadron. Aircraft that had performed flawlessly during training exercises fell in flames, their pilots victims of tactics that hadn't adapted to the realities of modern aerial warfare. The experience was both horrifying and educational. It confirmed his growing suspicion that survival required thinking beyond established procedures. But rather than becoming demoralized, Alexander began analyzing these early defeats with the same systematic approach he had applied to peacetime training. What specific factors led to successful engagements versus disasters? How did altitude, speed, and positioning affect combat outcomes? Most importantly, how could Soviet pilots use their aircraft's strengths while minimizing exposure to enemy advantages? His early combat record was mixed. He achieved some victories, but also experienced the fear and confusion that characterized the first months of the war. More significantly, he began developing modifications to standard tactics that increased survival rates for himself and the pilots who flew with him. The traditional doctrine of Soviet fighter aviation, emphasized formation integrity and coordinated group attacks. Pilots were taught to maintain position within established patterns, execute predetermined maneuvers, and prioritize unit cohesion over individual initiative. This approach worked well against poorly trained opponents, but proved inadequate against the Luftwaffe's experienced pilots. Alexander's analysis of combat encounters revealed fundamental flaws in these methods. Rigid formations telegraphed intentions to enemy pilots, making Soviet attacks predictable and defensive maneuvers ineffective. Predetermined tactics couldn't adapt to the fluid dynamics of actual combat, where split-second decisions often determined outcomes. His proposed alternative centered on four interconnected principles: altitude, speed, maneuver, and fire. Rather than approaching these as separate considerations, Alexander understood them as a unified system where each element amplified the others. Altitude provided energy that could be converted into speed. Speed enabled maneuvers that created firing opportunities. Effective fire eliminated threats while preserving energy for subsequent engagements. This integrated approach required pilots to think dynamically rather than following scripted procedures. Instead of maintaining formation at all costs, pilots would position themselves to maximize their tactical advantages while exploiting enemy weaknesses. Instead of executing standardized attack patterns, they would adapt their approach based on real-time assessment of conditions. The implications were radical. Alexander's system demanded that pilots develop intuitive understanding of aerial physics, enemy psychology, and their own aircraft's performance characteristics. It required split-second decision-making based on constantly changing variables. Most challenging of all, it required commanders to trust their pilots' judgment rather than controlling every aspect of their behavior. When Alexander began implementing these ideas with small groups of pilots under his influence, the results were immediately apparent. Survival rates increased dramatically. Victory ratios improved. Most importantly, Soviet pilots began winning engagements against German opponents who had previously seemed invincible. But innovation in military organizations often encounters resistance, and Alexander's methods created significant controversy among senior commanders who viewed his approach as dangerous individualism that threatened unit discipline and operational effectiveness. Military hierarchies exist for reasons beyond simple authority. They provide predictability, coordination, and control during chaotic situations. Alexander's tactical innovations, however effective in practice, challenged fundamental assumptions about how fighter units should operate. His success created an uncomfortable question for senior commanders. If a junior pilot could develop superior methods, what did that suggest about official doctrine and leadership competence? The resistance Alexander encountered wasn't simply bureaucratic stubbornness. Experienced commanders had witnessed previous attempts at tactical innovation that resulted in disaster. They had seen promising young pilots become overconfident and led their subordinates into catastrophic engagements. From their perspective, maintaining proven methods, even if imperfect, was safer than experimenting with unproven techniques during active combat. Alexander's growing reputation also created political complications. His victories attracted attention from journalists, propaganda officials, and political commissars who saw value in promoting a heroic narrative. But this same attention made some commanders uncomfortable. They worried that celebrating one pilot's achievements might implicitly criticize the performance of others who followed standard procedures. The tension reached a critical point when Alexander openly criticized established tactics during a briefing with senior officers. His presentation, backed by detailed analysis of combat results, demonstrated clear superiority of his methods over traditional approaches. But military organizations don't typically welcome public challenges to their fundamental operating principles, especially from junior personnel. Several commanders recommended disciplinary action, arguing that Alexander's insubordination threatened unit cohesion and military order. Others, however, recognized that his innovations were saving pilots' lives and achieving superior combat results. The debate created divisions within the command structure that reflected broader tensions between adaptability and stability during wartime. The resolution came through an unexpected source. High-ranking officials, reviewing combat statistics from multiple fronts, noticed that units incorporating Alexander's tactical modifications consistently outperformed those using standard methods. The evidence was too compelling to ignore. Innovation wasn't undermining military effectiveness, it was enhancing it dramatically. As 1942 progressed, Alexander's combat record became impossible to dismiss. His victory count climbed steadily, while his tactical methods spread to other pilots and units. More importantly, the survival rates of pilots flying under his influence remained significantly higher than the average for Soviet fighter aviation. The transformation wasn't just personal, it was systematic. Alexander had proven that individual excellence could be taught, that superior tactics could be transmitted, and that innovation could coexist with military discipline. His success created a template that other talented pilots could follow and adapt to their own circumstances. Recognition came in multiple forms. Fellow pilots sought his advice and mentorship. Journalists began featuring his exploits in newspapers and radio broadcasts. Military decoration committees recommended him for increasingly significant honors. But perhaps most meaningfully, enemy pilots began avoiding encounters with units known to employ his tactical methods. The psychological impact of this recognition was complex. Fame in wartime can become a burden. It creates expectations, attracts dangerous attention, and sometimes transforms soldiers into symbols rather than allowing them to remain human beings facing life and death challenges. Alexander navigated these pressures by maintaining focus on practical objectives, improving his own performance, developing better tactics, and sharing effective methods with other pilots. His first Hero of the Soviet Union designation came not just for individual achievements, but for his broader contribution to aviation effectiveness. The citation recognized both his personal valor and his role in developing tactics that enhanced the combat capability of entire fighter units. This recognition marked a turning point in how Soviet military leadership viewed tactical innovation. Rather than seeing Alexander's methods as dangerous individualism, they began understanding them as valuable military assets that could be systematized and taught throughout the Air Force. The skies above the Eastern Front became theaters where individual skill, technological capability, and tactical innovation converged in deadly combinations. Alexander's most famous engagements weren't simply displays of personal courage. They were demonstrations of how superior tactics could overcome seemingly impossible odds. One encounter over the Kuban region illustrates the practical application of his revolutionary methods. German fighters had established air superiority through conventional tactics, maintaining formation discipline while executing coordinated attacks against Soviet aircraft. Previous Soviet responses had followed predictable patterns, making them vulnerable to experienced Luftwaffe pilots. Alexander approached this challenge differently. Instead of meeting the German formation head-on, he used altitude and positioning to create multiple engagement opportunities while maintaining energy reserves for escape or follow-up attacks. His aircraft became a mobile weapon system rather than a component in a static formation. The engagement began with Alexander climbing above the German formation, using his aircraft's superior high-altitude performance to gain positional advantage. When the Germans moved to attack Soviet bombers, Alexander dove at high speed, targeting the formation leader while maintaining enough energy to execute rapid direction changes that prevented effective retaliation. The psychological effect on enemy pilots was as important as the physical damage. German fighters, accustomed to facing predictable Soviet tactics, found themselves dealing with an opponent who seemed to anticipate their moves while maintaining initiative throughout the engagement. This uncertainty disrupted their coordination and created opportunities for other Soviet pilots to achieve victories. Similar encounters occurred repeatedly throughout Alexander's combat career. Each engagement provided new data about enemy capabilities, aircraft performance, and tactical effectiveness. He refined his methods continuously, adapting to new aircraft types, different weather conditions, and evolving enemy tactics. These individual victories accumulated into something larger, a comprehensive understanding of aerial combat that would influence Soviet aviation doctrine for decades. Alexander's personal success became a foundation for systematic improvements that enhanced the effectiveness of thousands of other pilots. Military decorations serve multiple purposes beyond recognizing individual achievement. They provide examples for other soldiers, boost morale during difficult periods, and demonstrate that exceptional performance will be acknowledged and rewarded. Alexander's first Hero of the Soviet Union award fulfilled all these functions while marking his transition from exceptional pilot to national symbol. The ceremony itself reflected the complex relationship between individual achievement and collective effort during wartime. Alexander stood before senior commanders and political officials, representing not just his own accomplishments, but the potential of Soviet aviation to overcome initial defeats and achieve ultimate victory. But heroism in wartime carries unexpected burdens. Media attention transforms private individuals into public figures whose every action becomes symbolic. Personal relationships become complicated when fame creates artificial distance between heroes and their former peers. Most challenging of all, the expectations surrounding heroic status can interfere with the practical focus that originally created exceptional performance. Alexander handled these pressures by maintaining emphasis on technical improvement and tactical development. Rather than allowing celebrity to distract from combat effectiveness, he used his elevated status to promote systematic changes that would benefit all Soviet pilots. His influence became a tool for advancing innovation rather than simply celebrating individual achievement. The recognition also provided access to resources and decision-makers that had previously been unavailable. Alexander could now advocate directly for equipment improvements, training modifications, and tactical changes that would enhance overall Air Force effectiveness. His heroic status became a platform for promoting the broader transformation of Soviet aviation. This pattern, using personal recognition to advance systematic improvements, would characterize Alexander's approach throughout the war. He understood that individual excellence, however impressive, remained limited in impact unless it could be transmitted to others and institutionalized within military organizations. As Alexander's reputation grew, younger pilots began seeking opportunities to fly with him and learn his methods. This informal mentorship evolved into systematic instruction that would multiply his impact far beyond his personal combat achievements. Teaching tactics proved as challenging as developing them. It required translating intuitive understanding into communicable knowledge. The process began with small groups of pilots who showed particular aptitude and interest in tactical innovation. Alexander would conduct detailed briefings before missions, explaining not just what they should do, but why specific techniques worked and how they could be adapted to different situations. After each engagement, he led thorough analyses that helped pilots understand what had worked, what had failed, and what could be improved. His teaching method emphasized principles rather than rigid procedures. Students learned to assess situations dynamically, make rapid decisions based on changing conditions, and adapt their responses to exploit enemy weaknesses while maximizing their own advantages. This approach required more intensive training than traditional methods, but it produced pilots who could think independently while maintaining tactical coordination. The results were dramatic. Units trained by Alexander consistently achieved superior combat results compared to those using conventional methods. Survival rates improved, victory ratios increased, and mission effectiveness enhanced significantly. Word of these improvements spread throughout Soviet aviation, creating demand for broader implementation of his methods. But scaling innovative tactics from small groups to entire air forces presented new challenges. Military organizations resist rapid change for good reasons. Hasty modifications can create confusion, reduce reliability, and endanger personnel. Alexander had to prove that his methods could be taught safely and systematically without compromising operational effectiveness. The solution emerged through careful documentation of his techniques, development of structured training programs, and gradual expansion from individual units to larger formations. Alexander's personal involvement in this process ensured that essential elements weren't lost or distorted as his methods spread throughout Soviet aviation. Military history records few individuals who have received their nation's highest decoration 3 times. Alexander's achievement of Triple Hero of the Soviet Union status placed him in an exclusive category that included only 2 other people during the entire war. This recognition represented not just exceptional personal performance, but sustained excellence across multiple years of intensive combat. Each hero designation came at a different stage of Alexander's development and reflected different aspects of his contribution to Soviet aviation. The first recognized his emergence as an exceptional pilot. The second acknowledged his role as a tactical innovator. The third celebrated his achievements as a leader and teacher whose influence extended far beyond his personal combat record. The progression from individual excellence to systematic influence illustrates how true military leadership develops. Alexander's early victories demonstrated personal capability. His tactical innovations proved intellectual creativity. His success as a teacher and mentor showed ability to multiply effectiveness through others. But Triple Hero status also created unique pressures. Alexander became one of the most recognizable faces of Soviet aviation, with corresponding expectations for continued exceptional performance. Media attention intensified, political significance increased, and the symbolic weight of his example grew heavier. The challenge of maintaining peak performance while managing these external pressures would have overwhelmed many individuals. Alexander succeeded by maintaining focus on practical objectives, improving tactics, training pilots, and contributing to mission success. He used his elevated status as a tool for advancing Soviet aviation, rather than allowing it to become a distraction from operational effectiveness. The historical significance of Triple Hero status extended beyond individual recognition. It demonstrated Soviet ability to produce military leaders capable of competing with the best pilots from any nation. More importantly, it proved that systematic innovation could emerge from within military organizations and contribute to ultimate victory. Alexander's influence on the war's outcome extended far beyond his personal combat record of 59 confirmed victories. His tactical innovations, teaching methods, and leadership example contributed to a fundamental transformation of Soviet aviation that helped tip the balance of aerial warfare on the Eastern Front. The numbers tell part of the story. Units employing his methods achieved victory ratios that exceeded traditional formations by significant margins. Pilot survival rates improved dramatically. Mission effectiveness increased substantially. But statistics alone don't capture the psychological and strategic implications of these improvements. Soviet aviation's transformation from early war weakness to late war dominance reflected multiple factors: improved aircraft design, better training programs, increased production capacity, and accumulated combat experience. Alexander's contributions intersected with all these elements, but his unique impact lay in proving that tactical innovation could be systematized and transmitted throughout large organizations. The Kursk offensive in 1943 provided a major test of Soviet aviation's evolution. German forces assembled massive air armadas to support their ground operations, confident that aerial superiority would enable their armored breakthrough. But Soviet pilots, many trained in Alexander's methods, met this challenge with unprecedented effectiveness. Alexander personally flew multiple missions during the Kursk battles, but his greater contribution came through the hundreds of pilots who had absorbed his tactical principles. The cumulative effect of improved individual performance created qualitative changes in overall Soviet aviation capability that German planners hadn't anticipated. The liberation campaigns of 1944 and 45 confirmed Soviet aviation's transformation. Air superiority, once a German advantage, had shifted decisively. Soviet pilots now initiated engagements with confidence, executed complex operations with precision, and achieved tactical objectives that would have been impossible earlier in the war. Alexander's role in this transformation demonstrates how individual innovation can influence historical outcomes when it addresses fundamental challenges and proves scalable across large organizations. His tactical revolution became part of the broader Soviet victory that ended the war in Europe. Victory in 1945 created new challenges for military aviation and the exceptional individuals who had contributed to wartime success. The transition from combat operations to peacetime service required different skills and priorities. Alexander's post-war career illustrates how wartime heroes adapted to changed circumstances while continuing to contribute to their nation's military development. The Soviet Air Force of the late 1940s faced technological and strategic challenges that differed dramatically from wartime conditions. Jet aircraft were replacing propeller-driven fighters, nuclear weapons were changing strategic calculations, and the emerging Cold War created new operational requirements. Alexander's experience and reputation positioned him to influence how Soviet aviation would adapt to these developments. His assignments included command positions, training responsibilities, and participation in aircraft development programs. These roles allowed him to apply his analytical approach to peacetime challenges while sharing combat-tested insights with a new generation of pilots who would never experience the intensive aerial battles of the Second World War. The Korean conflict provided an unexpected opportunity for Soviet aviation to test its post-war development against experienced Western pilots flying advanced aircraft. Although Soviet involvement remained officially denied, experienced pilots like Alexander played crucial roles in analyzing combat results and refining tactics for jet-age warfare. His influence extended beyond immediate operational concerns to broader questions about aviation doctrine, pilot training, and technological development. The principles he had developed during wartime, systematic analysis, adaptive thinking, and continuous innovation, proved equally valuable for addressing peacetime challenges. Alexander's post-war career also involved significant administrative responsibilities as Soviet military aviation expanded and modernized. His reputation for competence and innovation made him a natural choice for positions requiring both technical expertise and leadership capability. Military retirement opened new avenues for Alexander to share his knowledge and experience with broader audiences. His transition to civilian life reflected both personal interests and recognition that his insights could benefit Soviet society beyond strictly military applications. Writing became one of his primary activities. His memoirs and technical articles provided detailed accounts of aerial combat, while sharing tactical principles that had proven effective during the war. These publications served multiple purposes: preserving historical knowledge, educating future generations, and demonstrating how systematic thinking could address complex challenges. His books avoided the triumphalism that characterized much wartime literature, instead focusing on practical lessons and analytical insights. Readers gained understanding not just of what happened during famous battles, but why certain approaches succeeded while others failed. This educational approach reflected Alexander's belief that knowledge should be transmitted clearly, rather than mystified through heroic narratives. Alexander also became involved in aviation education and youth development programs. His appearances at schools and technical institutes inspired young people to pursue careers in aviation, while emphasizing the importance of technical knowledge and systematic thinking. He understood that maintaining Soviet aviation's competitive position required cultivating talent among subsequent generations. Consulting work with aircraft manufacturers allowed him to influence design decisions based on combat experience and pilot feedback. His insights helped bridge the gap between engineering theory and operational reality, contributing to development of aircraft that better served pilot needs and mission requirements. These civilian activities reflected Alexander's understanding that his wartime achievements carried responsibilities beyond personal satisfaction. His knowledge and experience represented national assets that should be used to strengthen Soviet capabilities and inspire continued excellence. Alexander Pokryshkin's influence on military aviation extended far beyond his personal combat record or national recognition. His systematic approach to tactical development created methods that continued evolving long after his active service ended. Modern fighter pilots still study principles he pioneered, adapted for contemporary aircraft and strategic requirements. The integration of altitude, speed, maneuver, and fire remains fundamental to aerial combat doctrine worldwide. While specific techniques have evolved with technological advancement, the underlying concept, treating these elements as interconnected variables rather than separate considerations, continues influencing how pilots approach tactical challenges. His emphasis on analytical thinking over rigid procedure following proved equally enduring. Military organizations worldwide recognize that complex operational environments require personnel capable of adaptive thinking, rather than simple obedience to predetermined protocols. Alexander's example demonstrated how individual innovation could enhance rather than threaten organizational effectiveness. Educational institutions throughout the former Soviet Union preserve his memory through museums, monuments, and academic programs. Streets, schools, and aviation facilities bear his name, ensuring that future generations understand his contributions to their nation's history. But these commemorative efforts represent more than simple historical preservation. They maintain awareness of principles and approaches that remain relevant for contemporary challenges. International aviation historians recognize Alexander as one of the most influential fighter pilots of the Second World War, ranking his contributions alongside those of famous aces from other nations. This recognition reflects not just his personal achievements, but acknowledgement that his tactical innovations influenced the broader development of aerial warfare. Perhaps most significantly, Alexander's legacy demonstrates how individual excellence can create lasting institutional change when it addresses fundamental challenges and proves adaptable to different circumstances. His example continues inspiring military professionals who seek to balance innovation with effectiveness while serving larger organizational and national objectives. The questions raised by Alexander Pokryshkin's career remain relevant today. How do military organizations balance innovation with proven methods? When should individual initiative override established procedures? How can exceptional talent be cultivated and channeled for maximum benefit? His life provides compelling answers to these questions while illustrating the complex relationship between personal achievement and historical impact. Alexander succeeded not by abandoning military discipline, but by demonstrating how disciplined thinking could generate better solutions to tactical challenges. The boy from Novonikolayevsk, who dismantled alarm clocks, became the man who dismantled outdated combat doctrines. His story reminds us that the most profound changes often begin with individuals willing to question established assumptions and test alternative approaches, even when such questioning creates controversy and resistance. Alexander Pokryshkin transformed aerial warfare by refusing to accept that existing methods represented the best possible approaches. His legacy challenges all of us to examine our own assumptions, test our methods against reality, and remain open to better ways of achieving our objectives. In the end, he proved that true heroism isn't just about personal courage in dangerous moments. It's about the intellectual courage to think differently and the persistence to prove that different thinking can create better outcomes. This lesson extends far beyond military aviation into any field where innovation and excellence matter more than conformity and tradition. The revolution he started in the skies continues today, wherever professionals seek to perform better, think more clearly, and achieve superior results through systematic innovation guided by practical wisdom rather than institutional inertia.